Welcome back to the Mina Kimes Show featuring Lenny, the only NFL podcast. One of the hosts has never been slapped with the tag. He just wears it around his neck. That's Lenny. I'm Mina Kimes. And I am here, once again, joined ahead of free agency by my friend of the show, guy who ranked every single free agent or the top 100 free agents, I believe.
Top 100.
Top 100, okay. Dan Pizzuta, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me. It's always nice to be able to get on the show at a very fun time when a lot of things are happening. We're supposed to be previewing free agency, but it kind of feels like free agency started happening before we started recording. So there's always a lot going on in that little time after the combine. So we're jumping headfirst into this.
Yeah, before we get to today we're going to talk about some of the biggest free agents who are available and maybe discuss some possible destinations, kind of set the table for this. But news has been breaking. There's a few stories that I want to get to, some of which broke today. I haven't had a chance to talk about the Deebo Samuel trade, so we're going to talk a little bit about that. A couple things have been happening with the Rams. But first, the thing I wanted to address with you is it's not really about free agency. It's more about rewarding your own. News broke not long ago that the Eagles are giving Saquon Barkley what is being described as a 2-year, $41 million contract extension, making him the first $20 million a year running back. Christian McCaffrey was the highest paid back. I believe 16 was his APY. And he also has the opportunity to earn an additional $15 million in incentives. So first things first, I did take a second to look at Saquon Barkley's contract just out of curiosity. It is a true Eagles masterpiece of just massive void years. Because I was just wondering, what does this look like now? Dan, basically, they're kind of, you can talk about this, I'm sure you looked at as well. They're basically filling in some of those void years with more money is how I would describe it. So they were already committed to him beyond, it wouldn't have cost a ton of money, but they're just giving him more money. It's not a massive commitment for the team. It is, however, not something that we see every day.
Right. Yeah, it is one of those things where the Eagles definitely help themselves out by having the structure in place that they already had. When you look at what, Barkley was already scheduled to make, it was only going to be a $7.4 million cap hit in 2025, like 9.7 in 2026. I think basically what they're doing based on, what I've looked at, some of the reporting around this, basically just guaranteeing what was already on the initial deal, which it sounds risky for a running back. Again, it goes into, the short lifespan, but how bad would Barkley have to be in 2025 for them not to have him on the roster in 2026? So it still feels like a pretty safe way to guarantee that. And then, where there was only 2 years left on this deal. So you're having 2 years of extensions after that. The $40 million that they're adding is going to be stretched over that 4 years. So it's never going to be a huge deal where he's making $20 million in any of those years, even though we're now going to talk about it as a $20 million per year contract. But that's never really going to be the reality until probably the last year of this, where it voids, and it's probably going to be a pretty big cap hit. But I'm sure by that time, the Eagles will have figured out a way to lower that and kind of get around that too.
Yeah, I guess to anyone who's listening to this and continue asking, like, how do the Eagles keep getting away with this? So what Dan is describing is the usage of void years allows them to spread out the money that they're paying. You're pushing it out into the future. By the time you get into the future, you have the ability to then lessen that again if, he is cut or retiring or whatever. So anyways, he was a special player this year. He completely changed the tenor of that offense and the way defenses played them. It was a mutually beneficial relationship in my mind. He really benefited from not just the offensive line, which is, of course, best in the NFL, but also the threat of the pass game. And then they in turn benefited greatly from him. It was a very unique relationship, which I think gets me to the question that kind of follows every time we talk about Saquon, which is cool. So is this going to reset the market for running backs? We're going to talk about all the free agent backs later, not all of them, but the top ones. No is my answer. And there's a litany of reasons for that. But I think the biggest one is the situation I described was unique. Saquon stepping into such a great ecosystem for a back. Saquon Barkley is also unique. None of the backs who are free agents are even close to him or Henry, or I mean, it's just not that kind of class. If anything, Dan, I think the draft is where we might see running back value being maybe given a little bit more appreciation by teams that are equipped. It's an excellent running back class. Of course, I'm going to get into a detail later, but I do not expect this to affect free agency in any way.
No, especially with who is hitting free agency right now. And, we'll get to that. But I think it was a very special set of circumstances where Barkley and Henry were free agents last year, and they went to places in Philadelphia and Baltimore that were very uniquely just situated to get the most out of those two players. So I think if we are going to learn a lesson about, running backs from this, is to put yourself in this situation to have the infrastructure around a back like that to maybe make it easier on them. But in terms of, just trying to hit something by going to the top of the market on the running back, I don't think we're going to see that. That would definitely be the wrong lesson to learn.
All right, we'll get to some of those names shortly. Osa Odighizuwa, paid by the Dallas Cowboys. He's their defensive tackle. 4-year, $80 million contract, 58 guaranteed. So anyone who has like a really strong opinion about this is lying. It's just like, good player, got paid, fine. I will say, having taken a second to consider this and look at the market, I actually think this was really good by the Cowboys, honestly, to get this done, because that's not a lot of money. And I think ultimately it's going to net out to like a little bit below $20 million per year, which is less than the tag. I think Milton Williams is going to clear that quite easily. Just looking at some of the DT contracts out there, so Wilkins got paid a ton by the Raiders. I don't think either of them, or certainly not Odighizuwa, was ever going to hit that. But Lynn McNeil is the one that caught my eye, where he got paid close to $25 million a year. So I think for Dallas, who, listen, let's give them some credit, because we're constantly like roasting the Cowboys for being too late on things and taking forever and then paying top value. I actually think they got a pretty damn good deal for a player who gives them a decent amount of pass rush juice on the inside.
Yeah, they absolutely did. And I'm a little surprised that this is where it came in. I think, I was on an island looking at, my rankings and some other players. I had Osa Odighizuwa above Milton Williams in the free agency rankings, just because when you kind of look at what they've done as pass rushers, I think their rates have been very similar. Odighizuwa has been on the field more often, did not have, he has Micah Parsons on the outside, but doesn't have the same amount of help that Williams did with, Jalen Carter right next to him on the interior. I think he's not a great run defender, but I think he gave just a little more. So I am surprised, because you said you expect Milton Williams to clear this. I would have expected Odighizuwa to clear this on the market too. So Dallas did come in, and I guess with being able to get in a little early, I wouldn't say they got in super early. I wouldn't say this is a great, thinking ahead move from Dallas, but they did definitely get him under what I would have expected him to hit under the market. And if you're the Cowboys, you do need to hit that like at least once, right? You need to not be paying the top of the market, which they still, are close. But it's something where good for Dallas. We'll see if this extends to what they eventually do with Parsons, because it doesn't really matter if they're going to let that drag on. But yeah, this is a really good player who I think still has is going to be a good fit in the Eberflus defense, I think, in that interior. And I'm surprised that it got done this quickly and for what the price was.
All right, so the Rams, I want to talk about kind of as holistically a little bit here, because they've been busy after about 2 weeks of speculation. Our long national nightmare is over. Matthew Stafford is returning, which really, honestly, took a lot of the juice out of free agency. I'm not gonna lie, because he was so clearly the best possible option. It seems like I've just been catching up on some of the reporting. It's not they didn't add New Year's to his contract, so they just gave him more money this year, which certainly is a win for the franchise, because it felt like they were hesitant about adding years to his deal. They also extended their left tackle, Alaric Johnson, who's been solid for them. And then they traded, this was the piece of news today, they traded Jonah Jackson, who was a guard that they added, who then got phased out of the lineup because of the young players on the interior. So they traded him to the Bears for a 6th-round pick, which is not a lot. However, notably, they got his contract off of their books, which surprised me a bit. I mean, not surprised me, but I think that made it a pretty clear win for the Rams. Not saying it's not a win for the Bears. The Bears head coach Ben Johnson obviously has some familiarity with Jonah Jackson because he was at the Lions. I think after Trey Smith got tagged, just looking at the rest of the guards in free agency, and to me, this and the Deebo thing, actually, which we can talk about, the fact that both of these players, Jonah Jackson and Deebo, with sizable contracts, managed to get moved, suggests or reflects this is not a good offensive class in free agency.
Yeah, and I think we're just kind of seeing that overall the past couple years in free agency. And then I do think we
Yeah.
are seeing teams just be one more aggressive and willing to take shots on trades. And if you're a team that has the type of cap space like a Chicago or a Washington does right now, and taking on a year of salary while only giving up a day 3 pick, it is still significant salary they're taking on. But when you have that money, you're probably not going to be spending it that wisely if you do go out in free agency. I think that is still going to be, it's a bit of a market inefficiency still, where like you are not, even if you do have to take on the Deebo contract, right? If you're Washington, you're not getting that caliber of player in free agency right now, even depending on what Deebo is. We don't have to project the high side of that. And I think it's going to be the same thing for a guard, because Jonah Jackson, when I did the rankings last year, I think I had him in the 30s somewhere. He was really good in that Detroit season. So he's going to fit with Ben Johnson now. He is a guy who had some injuries and then kind of fell out of favor. So I do think that is a risk worth trying, especially for some familiarity, get a younger player in there. So I think we are going to see a few more trades in leading up to free agency, and maybe like once free agency starts, because I think that is still the preferred avenue to get some of these not top tier players, but players that are not going to be hitting the market otherwise.
And then you have these teams in Chicago and Washington who just have a ton of money. And it's with both of these deals, I kind of looked at both of them and thought makes sense for both sides. Obviously, for the Rams, made sense as a player who wasn't a starter anymore, who they were paying a lot of money, get that off the books. That's a great win. But also, as you said, for Chicago, there's like some familiarity, there's need, they have the money to spend, and again, there just aren't that many guards and receivers, offensive linemen, pardon me, and receivers in free agency who are options. I mean, the Deebo one, like, I don't do trade grades, but I thought, yeah. I mean, so really quickly from the San Francisco side, we knew they were wanting to move him. It's a big cap hit. And, they're obviously about to pay Brock Purdy. The fact that they were able to get a 5th, I thought, and get his contract off their books. Again, that's really have to look at it through the lens of that $17.6 million contract. That's a win. But then for Washington, his value is different than it is in other places. And, again, this is not a good group of receivers in free agency. I mean, I was looking at it now from San Francisco's perspective. I was looking at the draft and I was thinking, is there anyone who's like Deebo Samuel? No, I mean, there's not. People get comped to him all the time. He's still a very unique player. I think he's a perfect fit look, he's obviously a declining player. I'm not trying to oversell you on he's not the Deebo Samuel of 4 years ago or whatever. That said, it's really 1 year and then you're good. And he, to me, fills a lot of the needs that they had last year on offense, the needs that I think we'll see Cliff Kingsbury call a pretty similar offense this year in terms of being that yards after the catch option, yards after the catch creator. Obviously, Cliff loves calling screens. He's a screen god. Deebo. Cliff loves 21 personnel. The Commanders were incredibly successful at using it last year, first in EPA per play. Deebo will be used as a back. He still breaks more tackles than most receivers. He is still more agile than more running backs. So it just, to me, makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it's such a good fit, I think, and that's what I think makes this trade make sense in that way, is that Debo is that type of guy that they missed last year, where you had Terry McLaurin, who's going to do Terry McLaurin things and be really good, especially now with a quarterback who can get him the ball. But then they were trying to mix around a whole bunch of guys to play some of those other roles. Dyami Brown I love Dyami Brown, but he was both the screen guy and
Yeah.
the vertical threat. And it was just, they didn't totally have that guy. So now that you have Debo there, and part of his decline is how much more man coverage San Francisco was facing over these past couple of years, especially last year. Once Brandon Ayuk went down, you play man against San Francisco, and no one was really scaring you on that offense. So I think now with Jaden Daniels in that backfield, you're not going to be able to play a lot of man against Washington. So Debo's going to play more zone. I think he's going to have some more space. He's going to be able to play some of that more around the line of scrimmage. And then I think that opens up what they can do for that third receiver. Now, you don't have to necessarily strike big on that guy. You have a wider margin for error. You can get a bigger outside body if you want to get a speed threat to do on the outside. I think they have a lot of options right now, and that opens up what they can do on that third spot. And so I think adding Deebo there kind of helps round out that receiving core, which they didn't really have the option to do last year.
So on that note, and we can do the receivers now, and we'll get to Davante Adams, who's now in this group, having been released. I wouldn't hate bringing back Dyami Brown. You mentioned him. I thought he look, he obviously was, maybe not relative to draft expectations. It took him a while to break out. It was really in the second half of the season last year. But you really saw in that second half of the season with Jaden Daniels, so many instances where he took advantage of coverage being tilted to Terry McLaurin for huge gains. He is really fast. And I thought he actually flashed a lot of the big playability downfield that we saw at UNC. I also don't think he's going to be command a lot of salary. I mean, he's only 25 years old, but I do think like maybe a speedy wide receiver teams would be more looking for that in the draft. I don't know. Obviously, the devil is in the details, but like this Deebo thing here shouldn't prohibit you. I think, especially with the amount of money they have, from signing another receiver. And I was pretty impressed with what I saw from Brown. He's not even like, I've got my receiver rankings. He's very low, but just while we're here talking about Washington, I do feel like there's so little continuity in that building right now. The roster's really turning over. He is a player who I think really was quite useful for them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've been a fan of him since college, and it was nice to see how his role did start to expand when they started opening up that offense over the second half of the season too. So I would love if he comes back, but like you said, it's a weird receiver class in where we'll get to it, where the top of the market are some of these older veterans that you're kind of hoping you're getting a little bit out. The younger speed options aren't really there. So I wouldn't be surprised if we do see a guy like Dyami Brown get a little more money, just because I think he has a skill set that we don't really see a lot on the free agent market, especially this year. So, but like you said, there are a couple guys like that in the draft. So I do wonder if Washington is thinking that path, trying to get a little cheaper on that third wide receiver, especially now with Deebo. Dyami Brown would be pushed to number 3. I don't know if that's something where they're going to be paying up, but if he does come back and it's an affordable deal, yeah, that would be great, because I do think there was a bit of a connection that definitely opened up over that second half of the season. Was a lot of fun.
Washington just has so many needs on defense and I think this is a much better group of free agents on defense than offense after going through them. So I think they'll have to decide. This is why it's all like a complicated formula, because you're considering who's in the draft timeline, where do you want to allocate money. They'll have some decisions to make in that regard. In fact, when I was putting together a list of teams that I thought really need to focus on receiver, I didn't have Washington close to the top. It is about the wide receiver 3 for them. There's so many, though. I mean, the Chargers, the Panthers, the Steelers, the Giants, the Broncos, the Packers, the Saints, the Browns, the Rams, the Patriots. The Patriots, a big one. Cowboys, Titans, Texans. It's like half the league, I believe. So when we talk about the guys at the top of the market, I think we're thinking about some of those teams, specifically, I think the ones with a lot of money. But it's, again, this is not a great group, especially with Tee Higgins. Well, actually, let's start there really quickly. The Bengals say they tag Tee Higgins. They have been telling people they want to get a deal done with Tee Higgins. You still put in a call, right? If you're the Patriots, I would do it if I was the Chargers. I doubt they will. Just to see if a trade is even possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Because as we've seen with Tee Higgins the past 2 years, the receivers of Tee Higgins quality do not hit the market because they'll get franchised. So yeah, it is interesting. This is one of those things where Cincinnati, when they were talking, I remember last year at the combine when Duke Tobin was talking, saying if you want a Tee Higgins, to go get one yourselves because he's ours. Like, so back then you could have signed him to an extension. You would have been well ahead of this, not having to tag him twice right now. So this is another thing where if Cincinnati had seen what was potentially coming down the line, they really could have gotten ahead of it, probably been a lot cheaper than whatever a Tee Higgins extension is going to be now. For the Bengals, I think they're too far down this road to not re-sign Higgins because I think you've struck out with some of those defensive draft picks that you were really hoping were going to replenish that defense. But at this point, I don't know if there's going to be a quick fix by bringing in defenders with the Tee Higgins money that would help enough to offset what you're going to be losing on offense. So I think if I'm Cincinnati, I think I'm just doubling down and trying to make the best offense I can with Burrow, Chase, and Higgins, because when those three are together, it makes everything really click. And I think you see when Higgins isn't on the field, it's not really the same offense. And then I'd keep taking some swings at defense because I think eventually you're going to hit something. But I think they're just too far down the road with how they've thought about investing in offense that I think they really need to get something done with Higgins now.
Yeah, I'm of like two minds of this because part of me thinks, well, if you have a really dominant offense, why would you abandon that? Try to figure out everything else, stick with, and especially because I think Higgins' value in that offense it's kind of like weirdly the way we were talking about Saquon in the Philadelphia run game, right? Which is if you take a receiver who's really, really good, and Tee Higgins is really good, and you put him in this ecosystem where he gets to play with Jamar Chase is the equivalent of the Eagles offensive line, and Joe Burrow is the equivalent of the Eagles passing game, and like he benefits from that. Everybody benefits from each other. There's like a force multiplier effect of having him in this particular system. That said, that's what they did last year, and it wasn't enough. So it's kind of like, we could say, well, yeah, why not just run it back and have the dominant offense and see if you could figure it out on defense? Well, they tried. I guess the case for it is the bird in hand, right? Because we know what the offense looks like. We don't know what X player you'd be signing on defense, like a poo-poo platter of corners. And we don't know if that would be better. So I guess the familiarity and solidity of Higgins in this offense makes it the known quantity, and the known quantity is amazing. So I do think they're going to try to keep him. I really do. I'm in agreement with you. I think they're too far down at this point. But again, if a team blows them out of the water, I mean, if somebody offered me a first, you'd do it. So we'll just see. So with him out of the group, you're looking at the top, Chris Godwin, who I think is going to stay. All the language coming out of Tampa makes me think he's going to stay there. So, but he is obviously an incredibly useful piece for a lot of the offenses that I mentioned.
Yeah.
Davante Adams was released to nobody's surprise, given how much they were paying him. He, to me, becomes the guy when you're talking about teams like the Chargers, the Rams, maybe the Steelers, the teams we're talking about where they obviously need a receiver. I guess the Patriots, Cowboys, I don't think they'll do it, but he would be the one because I don't think it'll be a super crazy contract, but he has the skill set that all those teams need. I mean, do you think, are we valuing him appropriately? Do you think he is overrated at this point in his career or what?
No, I don't think so. Because when you look at what he was able to do last year, I mean, his had 2.05 yards per route run, which was 27th among receivers with at least 200 routes. But when you consider that was between Las Vegas and whatever was going on with the Jets. The
Yeah.
fact that he was still able to do that, and I think 16 catches of 20 or more yards, like he still has that ability and he can still be that outside guy, can move him into the slot a little bit. He still has the juice. He's not a guy who's, ever won with speed or just kind of straight up speed. So he is, such a technician. I think his skill set is going to continue to age pretty well. And when you consider he probably is not going to cost a significant amount on the market, which it isn't likely. Like he can still definitely you put him outside with the Chargers. That again becomes like this force multiplier
Yeah.
where Lad McConkey is now more valuable because there's attention being brought to Davante Adams and vice versa. So I think he still has a lot of value for teams like that who really need that boost.
I always mention the Charger, not always, but I've been mentioning the Chargers with him all off season, part because I think the fit with McConkey that you're describing, but I also think Herbert has proven to be like one of those quarterbacks who he'll give you a shot, sometimes infuriatingly so. Like there's been times where you're like, don't throw that ball to insert random Chargers receiver,
Yes.
and he'll just try it. And I think having a player like Adams who will reward that, especially like outside the numbers, deep down the sideline, I could see that connection working. But the Packers have come up as a possible. That's another possibility as a homecoming spot. That would make sense, frankly, to me as well. But I feel like Davante at this point is great. Like, does he really want that? I don't know. Maybe I don't know what the relationship is like. I think I never got the impression that there was like bad blood. Certainly not like the Rodgers kind of thing. So I have to think he's not going to follow Rodgers to his next destination. But you never know. That friendship appears to know no bounds. After that, it's like a bunch of older players.
Yeah.
I mean, Stephon Diggs, can I say Stephon Diggs was actually quite good last year before he got injured.
Yeah.
So again, a lot of that has to do with the like if you could guarantee me that he was the same player that he was before he got hurt, I would actually think that he has a lot of appeal to a lot of these teams. Amari Cooper, 31, DeAndre Hopkins, 33, Keenan Allen, 33. I mean, very different sorts of players, but it's an old group. Darius Slayton and Marquise Brown, downfield threats, both 28. Of all the players that I just mentioned, is there anyone that intrigues you, or like if you were one of those wide receiver needy teams, you would be interested in?
So I have two for different reasons. Of the veteran options, DeAndre Hopkins intrigues me if you really focus on making him like a power slot type of option.
Yeah.
That's something I wanted to see from him once when he got to Tennessee, and then they immediately signed Tyler Boyd and did not get really like that type of. So I think he still has that kind of just body awareness and the ability to just manipulate defenders. Where I think putting him inside more often could be kind of this next stage of his career where there's a little more out there where you can get to him. You don't have to have him be winning against press coverage, quite as much or trying to run past cornerbacks on the outside. So if DeAndre Hopkins as a slot option intrigues me, and Darius Slayton is a guy who the Giants just every year going into the season are just like, we really don't want this guy. And then suddenly he's leading the team in receiving yards. And he has this vertical ability that
Yeah.
just has not been able to be used with whatever the Giants have had at quarterback throughout his career. So for a lot of teams that need that vertical option, need a little juice, need a little speed, I think he is going to be intriguing where I do think there is some potential that has not been unlocked with him yet, just because I think he has been in potentially the worst offense that he could have been in for his skill set.
Yeah, he was a big reason why for the first few years of Daniel Jones's career, he always had like oddly good deep ball numbers from an efficiency perspective. Typically, Darius Slayton was on the receiving end of that. I do think he is perhaps an underrated player. And to go back to the vertical thing, like, just looking at some of these teams, again, the Chargers are a team, although that would be quite underwhelming after
Yeah.
fantasizing about Tee Higgins, but certainly an option for them. Um, Again, the Packers, the Rams, it's the same teams. Like it,
Yeah.
so it's going to be interesting, I think, to see. I don't think any of the players that we've mentioned get very large salaries. And so weirdly, some of these contracts could end up being bargains, especially if you hit on a guy like Diggs suddenly being healthy or perhaps, looking a little bit more like he did before the injury. If Godwin were, by the way, to not go back to the Bucks, he is an obvious fit for me in a number of places. The
Yeah.
Steelers being the probably chief one, but I mean, I could point to a few that I think he makes sense, and Texans are another team that comes to mind.
The Jags were one that I've brought up as the kind of playing his type of role, moving with Liam Cohen, being kind of that 1B with Brian Thomas Jr. for Trevor Lawrence. If you want to just kind of quick shot in the arm for what that offense could potentially be, that's a really fun one.
We do not have to talk about the tight ends, man. It's Gesicki, Juwan Johnson, Zach Ertz, Tommy Tremble, Tyler Conklin, Mo Alley Cox, Austin Hooper. It's a very good thing that this is a very good tight ends draft.
Yeah. If you need one, draft one. I think that's where we're at right now.
I don't think any of these guys are going to get enormous contracts. Johnson has had explosive play ability that's intrigued me at times. Gesicki, I think, in an offense like Cincinnati, has more value than elsewhere, where, he's just like a big receiver. I could see Ertz going back to Washington, that sort of veteran reliability. He was a good fit for them. But yeah, the draft this is an awesome tight ends draft, guys. So I can't wait to talk about them. I've probably watched about 4 or 5 of them so far. And I've heard it's even deeper than that. So I'm excited to keep watching. Okay. It's an awesome running backs draft as well, which is also good. Because I kind of teased this at the top. It's not a good group of backs. Just to read some of the names really quickly: Aaron Jones, J.K. Dobbins, Rico Dowdle, Najee Harris, who I think it just broke, was not tagged, unsurprisingly, Nick Chubb, Javonte Williams, Kenneth Gainwell, Ty Johnson, Cam Akers, Kareem Hunt. So for me, one thing I look at when I think about running back free agents, because so much of running back play is contextual, right? Like blocking situation matters so much, is I do like to look at rushing yards over expected per carry. And this was a big, folks remember this exact podcast last year when I was looking at Saquon as a free agent. One of the things I mentioned was that even though his counting stats and yards per carry were all awful because he played in New York, his rush yards over expected per carry, which is a next-gen stat that tries to isolate running back play by accounting for blocking and what a running back like should get, and then whether they're exceeding those expectations. I believe he was top 5 last year in Washington or in New York, pardon me, which suggested, hey, he's still really good. He's just in the jaw crap situation. So I did look at the backs in this class, and there was nobody like that who's like at the top. However, there are a few backs who have positive, like meaning they were getting more than expected. And those backs were J.K. Dobbins, Rico Dowdle, and Aaron Jones. Negatives were Najee, Javonte Williams, Nick Chubb, who's coming off of the injury. That checks out for me. I think the 3 backs I mentioned who are positive are probably the ones that I would be inclined to sign if I was a team looking to add a veteran back. I don't know if you like any of those names, or if there's another one you like, or you have general thoughts about this group.
Yeah, I mean, I had Aaron Jones as the top back in this class. I think I had him at like 34 on the top 100, and he's just one of those guys that I think is going to make your offensive line a little better. He's not always going to be explosive, especially at his age, but he is going to make the right read to where bad plays are not going to turn worse. And I think that is something where if you're putting that in, a rotation of running backs, that is certainly going to help with some other backs. I'm oddly interested in Najee Harris, who is not an explosive back, but when you look at what he was dealing with last year, 1.06 yards before contact per carry, which was one of the lowest in the league. And he was hit within a yard of the line of scrimmage on 56% of his rushing attempts, which was second highest rate in the league. So if you are one of these teams that does have a good offensive line, you might be able to open up some things. Now, Najee Harris is not going to be the explosive back that is suddenly going to take a bigger hole and rip off a 20-yard run. But if you are someone who's looking for something that is going to just kind of keep the chains moving, I think he's someone that could help. Again, I don't want him to be like my top back that I'm paying, $10 million or more for. But I think there is a little bit there that he could potentially bring up. But again, if I'm considering signing him or just drafting someone, I'm probably still leaning toward
Yeah.
drafting someone.
Yeah, I don't think any of these guys are gonna come in real high. So I generally like the approach for teams of drafting a back and signing a veteran and letting them work together. A veteran of this group that I like, if I had a preference, would probably be Rico Dowdle with Dallas, who is only 27 years old. Inexplicably did not get a lot of touches for the first half of the season, which I like as his next team, and maybe he'll stay in Dallas. I mentioned he had a positive rush yards over expected per carry, which is kind of what I look for. He also was pretty efficient. He had a close to 45% success rate, which was eighth amongst backs with over 100 carries. That's pretty good. Um, for me, like, if I'm Dallas, I don't know if I try to keep him. I think some of that has to do with what you're looking at in the draft. If they actually are the Ginty team at 12, maybe you're not wanting to pay a back. You want to get a little bit of a cheaper option. Assuming he can command that much, he might not be able to. But I thought I was impressed by him routinely in the second half of the season every time I saw him play, and a little bit befuddled that it took so long. So that's that group. Okay, offensive line. Let's just talk about the whole group because Trey Smith was tagged, which was kind of the big name. We'll see what happens there. Probably the next biggest name, both tackle and guard, is Ronnie Stanley with
Yeah.
Baltimore. There's actually a few I was like kind of pleasantly surprised by this tackle group as I looked at it, and I think maybe that there's going to be a few teams that go the veteran route, maybe because of the options available. I mean, Cam Robinson, Tyron Smith is 34. Dan Moore Jr. was always like surprisingly competent. Pittsburgh, Morgan Moses, Jedrick Wills, Dan Skipper, DJ Humphries. But Stanley is clearly the best. He had a real comeback season, honestly. Like, he played the whole year, which was notable, I thought, for him. He is 31 years old, but I think at tackle, that's not terribly alarming. I think Baltimore should try to keep him, Dan. So Patrick Mekari, who's now a guard but plays every position, is a free agent as well. I doubt they're going to bring both of them back. I just feel like, yes, you got a hit in Roger Rosegarten at right tackle, who was excellent last year. I think the continuity you get with Stanley is probably worth it. What do you think?
Yeah, I would say that if you are able to get Stanley, that's probably the one you go with, especially in the way that we have seen Baltimore been able to plug and play some guards. At that point, you probably don't want to be, too heavily reliant on that. But I think having Stanley out there definitely, and not having to reset at tackle, which I think is a slightly harder thing to do, especially in this free agent market. Like, some of the guards aren't going to blow you away, but I do think once you get further down the line, I think there's just more guards available than there are tackles. So I do think it's going to be a little harder to replace someone like Ronnie Stanley than it would be Mekari, who I think is going to be an interesting free agent just because he can do everything. So if you're a team that kind of just needs a plug and play somewhere, I think Mekari can do it.
I love Mekari as a signing for really any team that has any need, but like just the versatility that he brings to the table, I think should be really appealing. There's a lot of teams that need interior offensive line, maybe more than tackle. That was kind of surprising me too when I went through. Yeah, like when I went through all the teams, I was like, oh, like I think, like, for example, Trey Smith staying in Kansas City means that they're not going to be in the Ronnie Stanley, the top end tackle market. The Patriots, I think, are probably going to draft a guy. They should sign like a Patrick Mekari. Like, they need to add just bodies. But Houston, I wrote question, Cleveland, like whereas IOL, I mean, there were so many Trey Smith destinations. Half of the NFC North. LA needs IOL. I mean, there's Chicago. We mentioned that they traded for Jackson. So yeah, I think that is where you're going to see a lot more of a competitive market, and there are really good players. I mean, there's quite a few. Kevin Zeitler with the Lions, who's 35. Will Freeze, who was with the Colts but got hurt, but he's young. Mekhi Becton, who's an interesting, very like scheme specific player in
Yeah.
my mind. James Daniels with the Steelers. You got a couple centers, Drew Dahlman and Ryan Kelly. The Seahawks should really be in the market for one of them, in my opinion. Tevin Jenkins. So they're just, and Bakari. There's good players out there, I think, still.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Zeitler is one that stands out for me. I'm going to keep signing him to a 1-year deal until he proves he can't play anymore.
Yeah,
Because he was good with the
so
Giants.
good.
Went to Baltimore and was still good. Went to Detroit, was still good. So a guy who can just again plug and play for at his age with his experience has really one not shown signs of decline. Also, I think has like gotten better the past couple years of his career, and has been in a couple different situations. One like blocking for Lamar Jackson, and then the next year blocking in that
Yeah,
Detroit line for
good point.
Jared Goff. Very different. Responsibilities that he had. And again, he is up in age, but I think he played as well last year as he did in any year of his career. So if there is a guard there, because when you do look at the guards, there are interesting options, but there's always just something going on with him. Like you said, Fries was a little hurt. Same thing with Drew Dahlman at center. You have Ryan Kelly, who's getting
Yeah.
older, and there is something that you kind of have to talk yourself into with a lot of these interior guys. But if you're willing to if you're comfortable with what these guys are going to bring, I think this is the place where you can kind of get a little further down and have kind of that instant impact type of guy that'll definitely help. Like no one's transforming your offensive line in this group, but there's definitely going to be useful players, and I think this is the position on offense where that definitely is true.
The injury point is really good because as I was looking at these names, I think injury history is a big part of why some of these players are hitting free agency.
Yep.
You mentioned a few of them. I mean, Tevin Jenkins dealt with injuries. He's a good player. He was good when he was healthy, but he was in James Daniels, Philip Pittsburgh. Like they all have injury history, and I think for these teams, that's a huge part of the eval. So you're willing to take a little bit of a risk here and sign a veteran player who has some injury history. Yeah, and it'll be interesting. I don't think okay, so that's it on offense basically. In sum, I don't think any of these of all the players we didn't do quarterback. I skipped over quarterback because I did receiver because I was jumping. Oh my god. That's so funny. Okay. So quarterback, the big I guess news is it seems like the Vikings aren't going to tag Sam Darnold. Can't believe I skipped quarterback. It's literally never happened in the history of NFL podcasting.
Welcome to this year's free agency.
I know, right? I can't believe I skipped quarterback. Okay, so quarterback, you really do have to look at the teams that need quarterbacks, and then you have to look at the quarterbacks, and you have to look at the drafts, and then you just have to do like musical chairs and it's hard to know. The Matthew Stafford puzzle piece helped because the Giants and the Steelers, I guess, would be other team, and the Raiders all remain as quarterback needing teams, as well as the Titans, the Browns. I wrote Colts ? Because I think they'll bring in competition. They said they'll bring in competition, but they're not going to be at the top end of the market. So Sam Darnold is where everybody starts this conversation because he is the belle of the ball.
He is.
You ever watch the show Bridgerton?
Yes, I have.
The diamond of the season is what the queen calls it.
We're on like
God.
season 13 of Bridgerton by the time Sam Darnold is the belle of the ball. But yes, yeah,
Diamond of the season is Sam Darnold. There's still whispers that he might stay in Minnesota. I don't see it. It doesn't make any sense, especially now that he's not
no.
tagged. Maybe if he was tagged, I would have seen it, and then maybe they would consider even a trade. But there's zero reason why they would give him a multi-year deal, in my opinion. And then I don't see why Sam Darnold, who's never had a bite of the apple financially like this, why he would take less to stay with the Vikings. It just doesn't make sense. So I'm not buying that. I continue to go back to the Raiders as the most likely destination. What do you think any other team should be in the mix as well? Makes sense.
I would keep an eye on the Titans as potentially going the Darnold route, trading out of number one, and let's
Yeah.
say it's the Giants, right? So you're only moving back to three. You're still getting Abdul Carter or Travis Hunter. You're putting in Darnold in hopefully an offense that you kind of was hoping was going to work. Like you have a Calvin Ridley. It's not completely barren, but you do have Darnold for maybe 2 or 3 years where you're not going crazy with a veteran option, still kind of young. You're still getting some extra draft picks from a potential trade. And then you have Darnold on top, which I think could potentially be the way they go if they do decide to trade out of that first overall pick. And that might just overall for their franchise might be the better option just to kind of get the best of both worlds because you're probably not getting quality of an Abdul Carter or a Travis Hunter in free agency, as we've kind of
Yeah.
talked about. So to get kind of the most out of their situation, that might be the way to go. So I would keep an eye on Tennessee as going that route potentially.
Your logic makes sense. And I think for the Titans, trading down to 3 or 2, whatever, keep staying in Carter Hunter range and accumulating draft capital is the dream scenario, to be honest. Like, I think that is,
Yeah.
but I do think Darnold is going to get more than 1 year of guarantees. And I guess if you could do a 2-year deal where you draft a quarterback next year and then you have Darnold really under contract just for 1 more year, that's fine. So the devil would be in the details of the contract. If it's anything over that, I would not feel great about it. I wouldn't feel great about it for any team. Like, I think ideally you want to
Yeah.
do Daniel Jones, Baker Mayfield, Geno Smith world where it's really 2 years guaranteed in that sort of like upper middle class of quarterback contracts. I do also not love the idea, if I'm Sam Darnold, of playing behind that offensive line. Especially, I mean, that's kind of what I've been thinking when I'm looking at these teams. He's such a pressure sensitive quarterback, and there's none of these offensive lines are great.
Yes.
The Raiders aren't, but at least they have some good players on the line. I really believe that. And I think that if they were to sign him, they could focus on the lines in the draft. Obviously, they're going to have bad players on defense. I think the Steelers are just going to run it back with one of Russ or Fields. I don't know which one at
Yep.
this point, but that was the sense I got in Indianapolis from talking to people, which I can't imagine the fan base is going to love, but that seems to be what's happening. Rodgers to New York is starting to gain momentum. Rodgers. So, okay, if your scenario plays out, if the Titans don't go Cam Ward, then I think the Browns will. So that takes the Browns off the board. I think the Browns are going to take a quarterback no matter what. I also think they might try to add Kirk Cousins, but that would be like one of those Russell Wilson style deals. So then you're left with the Giants, who could take a shot at a quarterback in the draft. A Shedeur Sanders, Aaron Rodgers quarterback room would single-handedly be a stimulus package to all of sports media. I don't know why the Giants would do any of this. What should the Giants do? So that stuff that's being whispered about, and I think we've named all the obvious free agents: Daniel Jones, Jameis Winston, Jacoby Brissett, Mac Jones, Jimmy Garoppolo, Marcus Mariota, the other ones. What would you do if you were the Giants?
Yeah, so I actually wrote about this for today or Tuesday when we're recording this. Is I had the situations that you just said flipped. I had the Giants trading up for Cam Ward because I think right now, if you're the Giants, what do you have to lose at this point?
Yeah.
So I would expect them to be the team that is the most aggressive in trying to trade up to one if Tennessee does go the option where they are not going to have the first overall pick
Yeah.
and they don't want to take the quarterback there because I think Cam Ward in a way again not putting him behind a great offensive line, but I think he does have like the pocket presence where it's not going to be worsened behind the line. I think you take potentially a quarterback like Shador, who is a little more sensitive to pressure. I think that would hurt maybe a little more, but I think you have Cam Ward doing whatever he does in the screw it, I'm going to try something. And Malik Neighbors is on the other side of that. I think that's potentially, if there's any kind of development there, I think that probably gets some goodwill with, Brian Dable and potentially keeping that moving forward. So if I'm the Giants, I think that's option A.
I agree.
So I had the Rodgers Sanders duo going to the Raiders, which again is just, I don't know how much that works, but I think, Pete Carroll is a guy who probably is able to figure that situation out and keep both
Yeah.
of those guys kind of somewhat settled. I think the Chip Kelly offense for both of them in some ways is fun in the way that they kind of want to control the line of scrimmage, have, some of those screens would be interesting. I don't, again, at this point in Rodgers' career, I don't know what is a great fit for him, because any place besides like year 2 in Green Bay, where we kind of saw Matt LaFleur get a little more of his offense in there, like we still see like Rodgers still wants to run the Rodgers stuff. So I don't know where that is a great fit right now, especially because we saw it not work for an entire year with the Jets. So Rodgers is definitely the most puzzling piece of this quarterback class, of where he fits in and where even a team would feel comfortable doing that, because of all of that he brings in. Is at age over 40 now, is he going to be, yes, I will do whatever your offense wants me to
Oh,
do?
yeah,
I
definitely. He's
just don't
definitely
know.
gonna do
Yeah,
that. He's
right.
absolutely gonna be cool about it. Yeah, no. By the way, I forgot to mention the Jets, but I am operating the assumption that I think they're gonna sit this year out.
I do too.
I think they're gonna go bridge. Maybe that's Justin Fields, maybe it's Tyrod Taylor, Jameis Winston, I don't know. And to me, it's a good illustration of like, why it's a good thing when you're not operating from a place of desperation the way New
Right.
York is with their hot seat GM. And then maybe they trade up and get Cam Ward, and that would be exciting and fun if they do that. But I think the Jets, after the train wreck of the last few years, have fan base ownership that's willing to show a little bit of patience right now. And I think in this draft, that's a good thing.
Yeah.
So I actually think it's a great take your medicine year for the Jets. Rebuild, pay your guys, add the pieces you need. Don't obsess over finding the quarterback. I think it could actually work out in their favor. So, all right, those are the quarterbacks. Let's come back and talk about defensive free agents. All right, so we are back. Let's start inside out with defensive tackle. There's really one player that is worth
Yeah.
a lot of conversation, especially now with Osa Odighizuwa staying in Dallas, and that would be Milton Williams. Interested to hear you say you thought Odighizuwa was a better player. I mean, Milton Williams was fantastic this season, fantastic in the playoff run, finished 6th in pass rush win. If he's 26 years old,
Yeah.
I mean, talk about a guy just booming at the right time.
Yeah.
If I had hesitation as a acquiring team, and I don't think the Eagles are going to keep him, I think he is going to be priced out. It would just be that he played next to Jalen Carter and as part of that defensive line. So maybe you're a little bit worried. Well, was he a beneficiary of all those double teams? But otherwise, to me, he is an ascending player and one that I see a lot of teams that could use him.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other thing, playing about 40% of the snaps even, this year. So if you are signing him to this big deal, you are hoping that the efficiency that he has and the explosiveness he has as a pass rusher is going to hold up if he's getting a bigger role in that defense. But I think there are going to be plenty of teams who do need that interior pass rush that's going to be, they're going to take that risk and really hope he can, because if he looks like he does in the playoffs, and he doesn't even have to reach those heights all the time, because if he did, we'd be talking about him. We'd be talking about him in the upper echelon of interior defenders just overall. So I think you can take a step back from there, and he's still going to be a very useful player. There are a couple of different places like Houston would be super fun if they were able to do that. Like, they don't have anyone really on the interior. So to add that to their edge rushers would be just absolutely
Terrifying.
incredible. I think Arizona would be interesting
Yeah.
just because they have the Jonathan Gannon connection. They tried the Washington thing last year where we're going to try to bring in a bunch of guys who were going to be decent, and then they just weren't as decent as they should have been. So it still left them with a lot of things to do on the defensive side of the ball. So, Green Bay was a place where I thought Osa Odighizuwa could fit really well. Not sure how much they would be willing to spend on a guy like Milton Williams, but he's young, which certainly helps there. And I think they could use some help on that interior defensive line too. So I think those are probably like some of the more fun fits.
Yeah.
Whether those are going to be the teams that actually shell out the cash to bring him in,
Right.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, I added the Chargers, the Jags, although I feel like the Jags are almost chalk Mason Graham at this point. Every mock draft I've seen, and Ruth has them taking him. And then I wrote the Bengals, but they probably can't afford it. So,
Yep.
but that would be need there.
Yeah.
So outside of Williams, there's some useful players that I think it's really just kind of team specific. Like, what do you need? Like a guy like Jaron Reed was really good this year in Seattle. BJ Hill, Cincinnati has been solid with them. Players like DJ Jones, really good against the run. If you need like just a fire plug in the middle, he would be a guy. Last with Denver. Levi Onwuzurike from the Lions, pretty good. And then, sorry, I laugh. Calais Campbell, who is about to turn 40, and I said Milton Williams was 6 in pass rush win. Calais Campbell was 9th. Truly a modern miracle. What's that famous tweet? A modern miracle. He's still out there doing it. I mean, he actually, though, we joke about that because we use that language to talk about like 32-year-olds. He is 39 and still doing it. So
still doing it and versatile in a way where he can play inside, still plays on the edge. When Atlanta, he led them in pressures 2 years ago while playing mostly on the edge. And again, saying he led Atlanta in pressures does not say much, but the fact that he can still be this dominant force. And again, he's, I think, in the Kevin Zeitler range where I'm going to keep giving Calais Campbell 1-year deals until he proves he can't play anymore, because he's still a good player.
Also, like, just the kind of guy you want
in
your locker room. 2 other interesting names, though, really quickly. I think Javon Hargrave is a pretty strong cut candidate for the Niners. Didn't play last year with the injury. And then Jonathan Allen, who with the Washington Commanders, who wants out. And I wouldn't be surprised, even though they have a lot of needs on defense, if they do it, because they did draft Johnny Newton on the inside and they paid Daron Payne. Allen is due a fair amount of money. He might also be cut, honestly. So I don't think it'll be like it's kind of like we were talking about with the offense. Could you find a team that has a lot of money? Obviously not the player that he was at the very beginning of his, God, he was drafted so long ago at this point. When was it? It's been like, he's got to be like in his 8th or 9th season at this point. So
2017.
Okay. So that would be an interesting option, I think, for some of those more cash-rich teams that need help on defense.
Yeah, had $15.5 million in salary, nothing guaranteed. So maybe you'd be figuring out and tacking on a little bit, lowering that number, maybe giving him a year or two and an extension if you wanted to do that. But yeah, he's still been good. And again, we just kind of have looked at some of these teams and how important just interior defensive line has played, and he is going to be one of those guys who does give you penetration and pass rush ability from that spot, which is something that I think, a lot of teams need. So I think he was originally talked about as part of the Deebo trade, and then it didn't work out.
Yeah.
So it is something where I would expect him to be moved either before free agency, or I think, early on when free agency starts. And I think he still has a lot to give as someone who can be a veteran interior option.
Okay, so for edge, I have a thought experiment for you.
Okay.
Would you rather sign Josh Sweat, 28-year-old, should have been the Super Bowl MVP, but didn't have a ton of production before that in the season to a multi-year big contract. I guess I should think of the exact. It's obviously not going to be, anywhere close to the top of the edge market. Or have Khalil Mack on a 1-year deal, 34 years old.
I think I'm still going Khalil Mack
He's
because
still good.
he's still good, especially when you look at some of his rates, like his get off rate from next gen stats was still the best of this edge rush class
That's
in free
crazy.
agency. So he's still, not going to be, doing the super high pressure rates. And over the past couple of years, he's ran really hot with the amount of quarterback hits that have turned into sacks, usually about that's, 40 to 45%
Yeah.
of those usually get converted. And, he's been, 50, 60% sometimes and even higher. So, he's still a good run defender. So the fact that he still has that get off while he is defending the run well, it's not something where he is one of these guys that's cheating on a lot of his pass rush snaps. So the fact that he just kind of still has all of that in his bag, if you can get him for a 1-year deal, I think that is something that is definitely going to be worth it for a team that maybe needs some quick edge rush help.
I do like Sweat, and his underlying numbers are
Yeah.
good as well, but, he is, like, the opposite. He had, like, the reverse Sam Darnold where, like, at the end of the season, you just talk about, like, peaking in everybody's memory at the right time. Has not been as good as he looked in that Super Bowl game. He is a good player, though. And, he had decently high pressure rate, despite the low sacks and whatnot. This is an interesting group of edges because I don't really think there's a clear ranking. And I don't think there's like a clear, I really think it's just going to come down to age, need, and also injury perception. I keep coming
Yep.
back to that,
That's
but a
a
lot
big
of these
one.
guys are coming off of injuries. A guy like Malcolm Kuntz with the Raiders, who's younger, 27,
Yep.
was fantastic in 2023, but then he got hurt right away at the beginning of the season. So now he's a free agent. That's a player where, like, if you're an acquiring team and you feel like the injury is not going to affect him, I would love to take a flyer on him. DeMarcus Lawrence, older, coming off the injury. Hassan Reddick's the weird one because what the
Yeah.
hell happened last year, and also he didn't look good when he came back. But again, it was such a bizarro season for him with the holdout. I think Chase Young is an interesting player. Some of the underlying metrics liked
Yep.
his performance in New Orleans. This is crazy. Chase Young is 26.
Yep.
He feels so much older than 26. But I do think that there's potential there. And then just to rattle off a bunch of names, Dayo Odeyingbo, who's very young, coming from the Colts, but they drafted Latu, Matthew Judon, not old, not young, Dante Fowler, Baron Browning, Marcus Davenport, Azeez Ojulari, Draymond Jones was just released by the Seahawks. And then I think Joey Bosa is a pretty likely cut candidate, and then Harold Landry as well. So of all the names that I just mentioned, is there anyone who particularly intrigues you?
Yeah, like you said, Chase Young is interesting just because of how good he was at creating pressure last year, and that was on a defense that didn't really have a lot going for it along the defensive line. So he definitely had a healthy season, which is kind of what you wanted, and he signed that 1-year deal with the Saints, coming off of what we were like really worried about what his injury was going to be and whether that was going to impact him. So the fact that he was able to stay healthy for most of the season and still have production was good. Like you said, Odenigbo is kind of the opposite of Khalil Mack. Only
Yeah.
17.6% of his hits turned into a sack last year.
Mhm.
So if you are expecting some regression to, even if that is still below average at, at 35%, he's still getting to the quarterback, just not getting the sacks that come with it, but getting to the quarterback based on what Indianapolis's secondary was. That's not super surprising that a quarterback was able to get the ball out just before he was sacked while he was still getting there. So I think he's someone that could definitely be a little bit of a buy low, where I think his pass rush effectiveness was a little better than what his sacks were looking like. A guy like Baron Browning too, who is interesting, plays a very specific role, but if you need that, I think he played really
Yeah.
well once he went to Arizona. And again, like so many of Arizona's pass rushers are just weird in what they're kind of asked to do. But I think he did play
He has
fairly well.
juice. Yeah,
Yes.
obviously, it was the injury, but yeah, he was a guy who I did like in Denver, and I thought on a per snap basis was interesting and effective.
And again, none of these guys are going to completely change what a team is doing in their
Yeah.
pass rush. You know, you can get maybe a hit that on a Khalil Mack or a Josh Sweat if you hit their high side, but the rest of these guys, you're just kind of filling in to make sure you have someone who can rush the passer.
Yeah, I think when you're looking at teams too, like the Ravens and the Chiefs of the world, and then you start thinking about some of these older players like a Joey Bosa, or if like Von Miller is cut, or some of the guys that we've mentioned, you could see some like late free agency signings, and then
Yep.
they're like next thing you know, they have like double digit sacks or whatever. So, but
Yeah. Whoever
yeah, it's
Baltimore
definitely a
signs
very
in August.
uneven group now, right? Whoever's going to be their new Kyle Van Noy dropped. Okay, I am really excited about the next position group because I think it is deep, and I have a general philosophy that I want to run by you, which is if I was running an NFL franchise, I would absolutely pay veteran linebackers. I think this is the way. So let's start with the players. Zach Bond, who I'm convinced the Eagles are going to retain.
Yeah.
Ernest Jones. This is not in the order. I haven't ordered generally. Ernest Jones, Nick Bolton, Dre Greenlaw, Jamian Sherwood, Kaiser White, Levante David, my king, Bobby Wagner, EJ Speed, Jerome Baker, Cody Barton, Justin Sternad, Tyrell Dodson, EJ Speed, Denzel Perryman, Shaq Thompson, Robert Spillane. There's more. First of all, a lot of good NFL players in that
Yeah.
group. Like really good players. I mean, all with every other group, I've been like, maybe if he comes off the injury right, he could play. I think I just named a bunch of starters. So let's start there. I think many of those guys would be starters on good teams. The other thing I'll say, and the reason I brought it, I wanted to hear you talk about this position group is I really believe we have seen smart teams pay linebackers because it's not a lot of money. So the contract's not huge. The values haven't gone up that much. We'll see how much Bond makes. I'm sure I think he has the ability to reset the market there. But also because the curve for development for these rookie linebackers, it takes them so long to become good players. You're not really reaping the benefits of the contract. And also the contracts aren't that much cheaper than the veteran contracts. So I would much rather sign a couple of these guys if I was a playoff team than draft someone in the second or third round and hope that in 3 or 4 years they become one of these guys. Are you with me on that? And do you like any of these players in particular?
I am, yeah. Especially like when you look at what these contracts are. I mean, Roquan Smith right now making $20 million a year, Fred Warner 19. But then you jump to the guy making at fourth. Matt Milano is only making 14. Fifth, Patrick Queen was a free agent signing last year at kind of the top of the market, only at 13.7. So there is a significant drop. And this is not a position where you are going expensive to even get to really the top of the market. The guy that stands out to me that I feel like I still like more than a lot of people is Ernest Jones. Um, I think the Rams could have used an Ernest Jones like linebacker last year. I think we saw how he impacted 3 teams last year, where I think we saw what the Rams were missing with him. We saw him play well in Tennessee during the first half of the season, and then we saw him completely change what Seattle's defense could do in the second half
Yeah.
of the season, where they went from about average in run defense EPA per play over the first half. They were to like a top 5 run defense by EPA per play over the second half of the season while he was there. I think he does have some coverage ability when he needs to do that. He's a little better, going forward. But just his ability to kind of jump into, he put 3 teams the past, what, 24 months, and was able to really impact what he was able to do. And I think he is that type of just kind of plug and play guy you can put in the middle that makes other things on the defense easier, which I think is what we saw in Seattle too, where I think he made the defensive line's jobs were a little easier because they
Yeah.
had someone to clean it up a little bit. The safeties' jobs were a little easier because they didn't have to clean up so much in that second level too. So you have a guy like that, and I think it does change what a defense can do. Yeah, Ernest Jones is one of my favorite linebackers in the league, and I think it's going to be really fun to see where he goes.
I hope that the Seahawks keep him. So to your point, and it's funny because they like speed ran through like 20 linebackers last year. Some of the free agents I mentioned were cuts. And by the way, like it's no coincidence, like it's a moment now where offenses have gotten better and more willing to run the football, and teams that don't have good linebacker play are getting punished for it. The Rams to me are a team that I would consider adding like I haven't quite picked maybe like a Nick Bolton or something. They just feel like it's a position that they've skimped on.
Yep.
And I would like to see them address that, especially being in the NFC, going against the Eagles and the Lions and whatnot. I really like Jamie Sherwood with the
Yeah.
Jets. I think he's a really underrated player.
Yep.
Yeah. And then just to wrap things up, God, there's a lot of good corners too. Like I was looking at this group and I don't think anyone's gonna. We could do the safeties as well. Javon Holland is the guy who jumps out, who's the safety from the Dolphins, who's gonna maybe command top of the market money. And other than that, I don't think any of these corners will. But there's a lot of solid players. I mean, just to name them: Travarius Ward, DJ Reed, Byron Murphy, Paulson Adebo, Asante Samuel Jr., Christian Fulton, sneaky resurgence in LA, Carlton Davis, Darius Slay was just cut, Gilmore, Douglas, Jair Alexander as a trade candidate. And then with the safeties, you've got, I mentioned Holland, Cam Bynum, Justin Reed, Talanoa Hufanga, Trevon Merrick, Julian Blackman, Jeremy Chin, Andre Sisco, several more. Those are starters.
Yeah.
Like, so I think that is going to be a surprisingly robust category in free agency this year.
Yeah, safety I think is one of those positions that it seems to make a lot of sense to be shopping in free agency because there seems to be one guy who gets paid every year. That was Jesse Bates 2 years ago. It was Xavier McKinney last year. It's probably going to be Holland this year, and then you just end up getting pretty good bargains down the rest
Yeah.
of the line because I don't think teams are super interested in paying top dollar for safeties, but these guys become available and they are good players. I think when you kind of look at what Cam Bynum is going to be, that's definitely going to be good for some team. The way he can kind of bounce around, play that deep safety. Hufanga is a guy I'm really interested in what his market's going to be. Like if it's a 1-year deal, I'm jumping on that and just kind of hoping because when he's playing to his ability and he's healthy, like that all pro season was just incredible. And, if he was healthy, he's probably one of these guys that doesn't hit free agency. So that's potentially worth it. And Justin Reed too, where a guy who's I think still
Really
only 28 years old, going to be his third contract in free agency for the second time. He's still a very useful player who can bounce around a lot. So I think that the safety is where a lot of these bargains are going to come because that's not where NFL teams like to spend money, but it's probably where there is the deepest class in free agency. And that's kind of turns out year over year. And then the corners are interesting where there's not going to be that one guy who completely changes a defense, but a lot of good players. I think DJ Reed is really underrated. A guy who's played next to Sauce Gardner for the past couple years on a defense where they play sides. So it's not as if Sauce Gardner is going against a number one. They play sides, and DJ Reed has been good enough where they have opposing offenses have not avoided Sauce Gardner. So it's not in a way where they are just not throwing to Gardner's side because I think DJ Reed is still playing really well. I think he had 96 coverage snaps in playing press and gave up 40 yards last year. So he has this ability to kind of play a bunch of stuff. I think if he had more interceptions, we'd be talking about him more. He's a guy who has a lot of passes defensed, but I think only 4 interceptions over the past couple of years. But he's still making plays on the ball, stopping passes from being completed, which is what you should be asking for defensive backs. So he is a guy that stands out to me in that class.
Yeah, I agree on DJ Reed, who's been kind of perpetually underrated his entire career. I I think with some of these corners, before we go back, so first of all, a lot of teams need corners. I'm not even
Yeah.
gonna list them all. It's more than half of the NFL that I ended up having corners in need. So I think there's gonna be a robust market for a lot of these guys' services just because of the need aspect of it. It's very scheme specific, right? Like,
Yeah.
are you defense that wants a guy who could play man? I thought Carlton Davis had a really nice bounce back year in some ways in Detroit before the injury. I know statistically it was a little bit rough at times, but I thought he played really well. Darius Slay had a really good bounce back season, frankly, and with the Eagles. Not surprised he was cut. I don't think he was surprised either. But and then someone like Byron Murphy Jr. or not Byron Murphy, pardon me, Byron Murphy Jr. is the tackle, where he was really good this year. But it's like, is he more valuable to Minnesota than he is to the rest of the league? Because when he was in Arizona, I thought he was slot only. I was like, oh, not playing him at nickel, this is disastrous. And then, so I think it really just depends on fit. Travis Ward, down season, dealing with a ton of personal tragedy.
Yeah.
I think he's only 29 years old. I do think he can bounce back. I mean, he was so excellent a year ago. So just a lot of good players. It's interesting though, because like I do think in some ways the safety group is actually better. I think there's more really good players, like top end players, but there's fewer teams that need safeties. Like a player like Javon Holland, who, if we're going position by position, might be the best free agent, like relative to his, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah. Sure.
like he might be if you think of him as a top 3, 4, 5 safety in the NFL, he's available. That doesn't end his age. He's
Right.
only like 26 or something, 25. Like that doesn't happen very often. He's really good. But there aren't that many teams that need safeties. The Jets, the Bills.
The Bills. Yeah.
I would love the Bills.
Yeah, Holland's going to be 25 at the start of the season. So I think he's going to turn 26, and he is interesting because he was playing as like mostly a deep single high safety his past few years, and then was able to be moved around a little bit more with Anthony Weaver. There's still some pass rush production that he had. He had 16 pressures as a rookie, and hasn't really been asked to rush the passer as much anymore. And I think we have seen some of these safeties do a little better when they aren't asked to do as many things. But I do think there is still a bit, as well as Holland has played, I think there's still a little bit of untapped potential there too for him if they figure out what his right role is and you figure out the best defense for him. Because I think we did see him, play a little better when he got to just move around a little more.
Yeah, I am very curious to see where he ends up, and then whether or not some of these players stay with their teams, specifically Justin Reed, if they can afford him, because he's so fundamental to what they do in Kansas City. And it's incredible. He's like the oldest 28-year-old in the NFL because he hit free agency at such a young age. But like I would say he's one of the best run defending safeties in the entire league. So that defense is really complicated. They have so much youth around him. He very quickly became the old man. The Chiefs have been so willing to walk away from their vets on defense and just trust Steve Spagnuolo to develop young players. But at a certain point, you kind of hit a wall with that. So I don't know. But they just paid Trey Smith. If they give him a big contract, they're going to be pretty broke up against it. So that'll be interesting to see. But anyways, long story short, I like this defense. I like the safety group. I like a lot of these defensive players, particularly the back seven. Generally, I think this linebacker, corner, safety group is really what is jumping out to me in free agency this year, Dan.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think that just kind of seems to be the place where you are able to get some value on the free agent market. Like if you are looking at free agents, you're usually asking, why is this guy available? And, when it's on offense, usually something's kind of wrong because we don't see like we talked about, the wide receivers, the
Yeah.
quarterbacks don't hit. But on defense, it's usually, he's a good quarterback 2, and we're already paying our cornerback 1. We just don't want to pay, $15 million for a safety. Those are the reasons some of these guys are hitting the market. And it's not so much there's, something wrong with them as it might be for some of the offensive side of the ball. So when we see a deeper group, especially like you said, a linebacker, corner, and safety, that is where you get the value. And I think we kind of have seen that play out a little bit, where teams can kind of take 2 or 3 of these guys in free agency, kind of get a little bit of a jump start on a unit. And I think that is going to be what we see this year too.
All right. Well, speaking of free agency, Dan's 100 top rankings are available on the 33rd team, right? Online. But
Yep.
Dan is also a free agent. So if you're listening to this and you are looking to hire a very, very smart NFL analyst and you listen to this pod, you have heard him talk, you should check out Dan. He's Dan Pizzuta on both Blue Sky and Twitter, right? Same on
Yep.
both. I'll post your handles, of course, when I send out this podcast. But please reach out to him because he does amazing work. And I am always so thrilled when you come on this pod, Dan.
Oh, I appreciate it. It is likewise always thrilled when I get to join you.
In the meantime, you guys can check this out on YouTube, youtube.com/@Mina Kimes. I will be back next week to, I think, probably grade some deals as they start coming in. So that's going to be exciting because free agency really starts, before free agency really starts. It's going to be fun. And we're also going to start our draft coverage not long after that, which is very exciting coming from the Combine because, as I'm sure you could tell, I cannot wait to talk about some of these players. Oh my God, these running backs. I love these running backs so much. So I can't wait to talk about them. In the meantime, thank you, as always, to the wonderful folks at Omaha Productions who work on this show. Kirsten Sebecki, Anthony Jimenez, Owen Saylor, Jack Foster, and Tucker Tashjian. I'll see you guys next week.